A Samsung executive closes a $40 billion semiconductor deal. A BTS concert sells out in minutes in Brazil. Korean dramas dominate Netflix in 190 countries. South Korea is the 10th largest economy on Earth. It builds the world's best phones, ships, and memory chips. Now rewind. Seoul, 1953. A mother picks through rubble. Her capital has changed hands 4 times in 3 years. There is no electricity, no running water, no hope. An American soldier turns to his commanding officer and says something that gets recorded in a field report. "This place will never recover. We are wasting our time." He wasn't being cruel, he was being rational. South Korea in 1953 had a GDP per capita lower than Sudan, lower than Haiti, lower than North Korea. It had no oil, no gas, no iron, almost no arable land. 70% of its industrial capacity had been bombed into dust. And yet, 60 years later, it would be richer than its former colonial master. How did the poorest country in Asia become one of the richest nations on Earth? This is the story nobody predicted. To understand South Korea, you need to understand why everyone wanted it and nobody could keep it. The Korean peninsula sits like a dagger between 3 empires: China to the west, Russia to the north, Japan to the east. For centuries, Korea was a single kingdom, a buffer state that survived by playing powers against each other. Think of it like a small business trapped between 3 mafia families. You don't thrive, you survive, barely. But in 1910, Japan stopped playing nice. They annexed Korea entirely, erased its language from schools, forced Koreans to adopt Japanese names, stripped the country of resources and dignity for 35 years. When World War II ended, Korea wasn't freed. It was divided. The Americans took the South, the Soviets took the North. An arbitrary line, the 38th parallel, cut families, cities, and futures in half. Nobody asked the Koreans what they wanted. Then came the war. In 1950, North Korea invaded. Within weeks, they'd captured nearly the entire peninsula. American forces pushed back. China entered. 3 million people died. When the armistice was signed in 1953, South Korea was left holding wreckage. Imagine this: every major bridge destroyed, every power plant was wrecked, every factory flattened. The literacy rate was under 30%. Life expectancy hovered around 47 years. Inflation was so severe that currency was almost meaningless. And here's what made it worse: the South didn't even get the good half. North Korea had the mountains, the minerals, the heavy industry the Japanese had built. The South had rice paddies and refugees. Foreign aid kept people alive, but it didn't build futures. South Korea wasn't a country, it was an emergency room. So what did the South's first president, Syngman Rhee, do? He did what seemed smart. He took American money, built patron networks, and tried to hold power. It wasn't evil, it was survival politics. But aid without strategy created dependency. Corruption spreads, factories weren't built, cronies were rewarded. By 1960, students were rioting in the streets. Rhee fled the country. And South Korea slipped even further behind. You want to know the cruelest statistic? In 1961, South Korea's GDP per capita was $82. $82 per year. That same year, Ghana, newly independent Ghana, had a higher GDP per capita. This wasn't just poverty, this was a global embarrassment. Picture a young Korean father in 1961. He's fought in a war, he's lost relatives, he's watching his children grow up malnourished. And he's hearing, from foreign experts and even some of his own politicians, that Korea simply doesn't have what it takes. No resources, no capital, no expertise, no hope. This is the moment where most countries die. Not in a war, but in resignation, in accepting that poverty is identity, that failure is destiny. South Korea was standing at that cliff. And then something unexpected happened. In May 1961, a general named Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup. He wasn't a visionary philosopher. He wasn't a beloved freedom fighter. He was cold, calculating, and brutally pragmatic. Park looked at South Korea's situation and asked a simple question: what do we actually have? No oil, no iron, no timber. But there were people, millions of disciplined, hungry, educated people. Park's bet was counterintuitive. If Korea had nothing but its labor force, then Korea would export labor in the form of products. Not raw materials, finished goods. He wasn't going to beg for aid. He was going to compete. Problem 1, no capital. How do you industrialize with no money? Park created the chaebols system, massive family-run conglomerates that the government backed with cheap credit, protection, and guaranteed markets. Samsung, Hyundai, LG, these weren't startups, they were national projects. The government told them, export or we cut you off. It wasn't free market capitalism. It was capitalism with a gun to its head. And it worked. Problem 2, no skills. The workforce was willing but untrained. So South Korea bet everything on education. Mandatory schooling expanded. Technical institutes multiplied. Within a generation, literacy hit 90%. But here's the crucial part: they didn't just teach theory, they taught production, welding, wiring, precision manufacturing. By the 1970s, Korean workers weren't cheap labor. They were skilled, cheap labor. Problem 3, no technology. Korea couldn't invent the wheel, so they bought it. They licensed foreign technology, often from Japan. They reverse-engineered products. They studied, they copied. And then slowly, they improved. Samsung's first products were embarrassing. Hyundai's first cars broke down constantly. But they kept iterating, kept failing, kept learning. This was humiliating work. It required swallowing national pride. But it built national power. Problem 4, defense. With 28,000 North Korean artillery pieces pointed at Seoul, security wasn't optional. South Korea implemented universal male conscription. Every young man served. This wasn't just military, it was national discipline embedded into culture. And eventually, Korea developed its own defense industry. Today, it exports tanks, jets, and missiles worldwide. Problem 5, social cohesion. Here's what most analysts miss. Korea survived because it created a shared story. The government, the schools, the media, everyone repeated the same message. We were humiliated, we will rise. Sacrifice now, succeed later. Was it propaganda? Partly. But it also gave 30 million people a reason to work 12-hour shifts in factories. Shared trauma became a shared purpose. Now let's be honest. This miracle wasn't clean. Park Chung-hee was a dictator. He imprisoned dissidents. He controlled the press. Labor unions were crushed. Workers in the 1970s faced brutal conditions. Some died in factory fires with locked exits. The chaebols became oligarchic monsters, too big to fail, too powerful to regulate. Even today, South Korea has the highest suicide rate in the developed world. The pressure cooker culture that built Samsung also breaks people. None of this should be ignored. The South Korean miracle was built by people who often had no choice. Whether the price was worth it, that's not for me to say. It's for them. But here's where we land. In 1960, South Korea's GDP per capita was lower than North Korea's. Today, South Korea's GDP per capita is 25 times higher. The average South Korean lives 83 years, longer than Americans, longer than Brits. Korean pop culture doesn't just exist, it dominates. From Squid Game to BTS to Parasite, the soft power is staggering. And here's the comparison that still shocks historians. In 1945, Japan left Korea as a broken colony. By 2020, South Korean GDP per capita had surpassed Japan's. The colonized became richer than the colonizer. In one lifetime. So what does South Korea teach us? Not that authoritarianism works, not that suffering is noble, not that any model can be copied. But this, the worst starting position doesn't determine the final outcome. Resources matter less than strategy. Strategy matters less than execution. Execution matters less than the will to keep going when everyone says stop. South Korea had nothing except a refusal to accept what the world said it was. A foreign journalist once asked a Korean economist in 1980 to explain the miracle. He paused, then he said, "We had no choice but to succeed. Failure meant extinction, so we didn't fail." Not every country can replicate this, but every person can understand it. When the world bets against you, when the math says you're finished, the only variable left is whether you believe it. South Korea didn't, and that made all the difference.